There are 500,000 less people employed today. 500,000 less people employed today than were employed in February of 2020. 500,000 less employed. Employment has gone down from pre-pandemic. We haven't even caught up to the level of the pre-pandemic. Not only that, if we had a growth trend, which was the growth coming into the pandemic, we are about 6.1 million jobs lower than we would have been had we had the growth projection of the economy there. So this is what you got to see. This is the facts. I want to talk to you about one theorem of economics that I think is really important for all of you when you're looking at public policy. Redistribution occurs when you take from someone who has a little bit more and you give to someone who has a little bit less. You all with me? It's virtually 100% of government spending is part of the redistribution theorem. You take from someone who has a little bit more and you give to someone who has a little bit less. Now, obviously, when you take from someone who has a little bit more, you reduce that person's incentives to produce, and that person will produce a little bit less. Any questions? No. By giving to someone who has a little bit less, you provide that person with an alternative source of income other than working, and that person too will produce a little bit less. We're all together? The theorem here is clear as day, and it's simply math. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income, whether you're a Keynesian, a communist, a capitalist, libertarian, it doesn't matter. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. Clear? Clear. But the limit theorem here is beautiful. If you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone came out exactly the same, if you were able to do that, there would be no income whatsoever. Let me demonstrate it to you verbally. In order to get everyone to come out exactly the same, what you have to do is you have to tax everyone who makes above the average income 100% of the excess. And everyone who makes below the average income, you have to subsidize them up to the average income. You with me? That's the only way you can guarantee everyone. Now, if you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and you actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate, Counselor, everyone will come out exactly the same at zero income. This theorem is critical in all public policy discussions. You gotta follow it, you gotta understand it. What is the relationship between the highest tax rate on the top 1% of income earners and the state of the US economy? And it's unambiguous. Whenever you raise tax rates on the top 1% of income earners, the economy goes into the doldrums, goes down, poverty increases, and the economy slows down and underperforms. Every single time. The 1930s, they raised the tax rate from 25% to 94% at the end of World War II. I mean, the economy tanked. People did really bad. Whenever you cut tax rates on the highest income earners, the economy prospers, goes into a boom. This is the Kennedy go-go 60s, Ronald Reagan period, the 1920s. Any of these periods you can look at, lowering those tax rates creates high tax rates, poor performance, low tax rates, great performance, period. Now, when you raise tax rates in the rich, it is very, very true that income inequality decreases. When you raise tax rates, it decreases. It's also true when you lower tax rates in the rich, income inequality increases. That's true. But what they don't tell you is how that occurs. And what happens is when you raise tax rates on the rich do earn less, but what they do earn, they shelter. So they have a massive drop in reported incomes. The incomes of the low-income workers drop as well. In other words, they're worse off as well. It's just the rich have got poorer faster than the poor have gotten poorer. Income inequality, which has diminished dramatically during the 1930s and 1940s. Duh. Is that the time that was good for the poor, the minority, the disenfranchised? Absolutely not. Whenever they raise tax rates on the rich, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners goes down. Every time. In the 1920s, when they cut the tax rates on the rich, revenues from the top 1% more than doubled, way up. When they raised it in the 1930s, tax revenues from the rich went way down. You can look at the Kennedy go-go 60s. They lowered tax rates, revenues went way up on the rich. If you look, it's a pattern that follows year by year by year by year. We have a true inflation problem. And it's not just gases, it's not just copper, it's not just lumber, it's a generic total product of the consumer price index. Now, the reason we get so excited about gas is because of all the really bad policies Biden did the moment he took office. The Keystone XL pipeline he did, he won't let anyone produce it. We went from energy independence to now energy dependence, and we precipitated to a large extent the gas problem that we've had, and it's not going to go back down to where it was. A little bit over 30% of all the consumer price index is rents, is home, shelter. I mean, that's not showing any signs of slowing down at all. Rents are going way up there. We have a real serious bout of what we used to call stagflation. That has been a generation away. I happened to unfortunately live through it. I lived through Jimmy Carter, and then being with Reagan all those years, we were able to solve it. The only way you solve it is sound money, guaranteeing the value of the dollar, which is what we did, and then producing a lot more goods and services. That's the only way out. Don't worry about one single product. It's the overall generic situation of the economy. A rotten, slow growth economy or no growth economy and rising prices is a deadly combination. When you look at macroeconomics, and that's what I'm in, there are 5 things you gotta focus on. Okay, what I call the 5 pillars of prosperity. To get the perfect system, you need a low rate, broad-based, flat tax. You have a low rate to provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And you have the broadest tax base to provide people with the least incentives to least places they can put their income in order to hide and not pay their taxes. All right, a low rate, broad-based flat tax. Spending restraint, number 2. All right, spending restraint. All government spending is taxation. All right? What you want to do on is spending restraint so you use your money wisely. You need to have sound money. When we came into office on January 20th, 1981, the prime interest rate in this wonderful country of yours was 21.5%. That's not sound money. That's Jimmy Carter. At the time, I thought Jimmy Carter was the worst president ever. God knows, I never imagined there could be a Biden. Low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, minimal regulations. We all know we need regulations. You can't wake up one morning and drive on the left-hand side of the road, the next morning the right-hand side. Hey, I changed my mind. No, you need regulations. But what you want to make sure is that those regulations do not go beyond the specific purposes at hand and create enormous collateral damage. There is an enormous amount of misdirected regulations in today's society that's costing us huge, huge amounts. Low rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraints, sound money, and minimal regulations. And lastly, free trade. And this one is no joke. We were brought into the Great Depression with a Smoot-Hawley tariff that collapsed the U.S. economy. It was incredible. Free trade. There are some things we do better than foreigners. And there are some things foreigners do better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make better than they do in exchange for those products they make better than we do. It's called the gains from trade, comparative advantage, David Ricardo, I don't care what the words are. And plus, when you trade with people, you usually like them. When they give you money, that usually makes you like them. And what we need to do is create a good environment in the world as well. Low rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraints, sound money, minimal regulations, and free trade. And then get the economy get the government out of the economy and let the economy solve itself. Now, how would you solve this economy today on inflation? And I'll just quickly, there are two ways of bringing prices down. Take me back to your Econ 1 class. You got your demand curve and your supply curve. The Keynesians always say, how do you reduce inflation? You got to reduce aggregate demand. Now, it's true. If you reduce demand, what happens to the price of the product? Let's say we have apples. If I can reduce the demand for apples, what will happen to the price of apples? It will fall, won't it? It will. But it will fall, and what will happen to the total amount of apples produced and consumed? It too will fall. That's the sort of deep root canal work theory of economics applied by Keynesians. Larry Summers, who presciently talked about the inflation was coming and all that, he did a great job on that. He now suggests we have to go through a deep recession to bring demand down to get that inflation. There's a second way of bringing prices down, and this is called supply-side economics. If you have a bumper crop in apples, if there's a huge unexpected increase in the production of apples, what happens to the price of apples? It also goes down, doesn't it? It goes down, and what happens to the total production and consumption of apples? It goes up, not down. You can bring inflation down if you want to by crushing the economy, by reducing demand, or you can bring inflation down by expanding the production of goods and services dramatically and bringing inflation down. In the 1980s, when we came in, we did two things. Number one, Paul Volcker allowed interest rates to be free and clear, as I told you. We had a 21.5% prime, which tightened money. All right, right now with Powell, he's controlling interest rates. Do you think price controls ever have worked? Absolutely not. If we let interest rates today go where they should go, how much would someone be willing to buy a government 10-year government bond for, which now yields about 2.9%? Would you buy a 10-year government bond yielding only 2.9% when you've got 9+% inflation and a bad economy? No. If he let that rate go, the rate would probably go to maybe 14, 15, 60%, which would all of a sudden tighten money and make money scarce, which is there. You need to have tight money by letting interest rates float freely, and secondly, tax cuts to create economic growth, the reduced regulations, reduced government spending. If you reduce government spending, regulations, and taxes, you would get an expansion of output, employment, and production, and you would get a tight money there, and that is the way we've got to go out to bring inflation.